Matt reminded the kids, and so I'll remind all of us, that last week we were talking about Moses creating bronze serpent and lifting it up on a pole so that whoever looked at it would have lived when the land was filled with venomous snakes. This might have been a more fitting scripture for today, for St. Patrick, whom we remember as driving the snakes out of Ireland. You know this, right? That one of the legends, one of the miracles attributed to Patrick of Ireland is that on this one day he stood on a beautiful green hill and in a loud voice banished all the snakes from Ireland, and those venomous little creatures all slithered away, never to be seen again. The archaeologists look to the fossil records and say there were never snakes in Ireland to begin with, so this was easy for St. Patrick. But we'll leave that as it is. We did snakes last week. Today you might be doing snakes or something green. And it's a handy legend, this idea of St. Patrick driving the snakes out. It's perhaps more interesting than cabbage and potatoes or warm beer, or maybe it gets more interesting the more warm beer and whiskey one has. And I wondered myself this week if Patrick was thinking of Moses that day he commanded the serpents. Or was it Eve that he was trying to save? Snakes. What to do with them? What they do to us, how God has treated them, it's the stuff of our imaginations. Last week, the lectionary gave us a set of ancient stories, and today the Blarney give us another. And well, here we are. So, whatever the case or not, snakes or not, happy St. Patrick's Day. If you see a Patrick, kiss him. He's probably Irish. And as for us, as for where the lectionary takes us today, we're coming into Lent of 2024's home stretch. Next week, we will begin with palms and hosannas and end with crucifix and a lonely tomb. Resurrection Sunday is 2 weeks from today. And between here and there lies life and death. Time has moved on this Lenten season. The clocks moved us forward last week, and spring officially arrives this coming Tuesday, precisely at 11:06 p.m., when the sun will pass across the equator from south to north. Lent has moved us on too, I imagine. Maybe not quite as dramatically as from south to north, maybe not from pole to pole, but maybe spanning across the sky. I will admit that my own personal Lenten discipline has waned from its salad day enthusiasm, and I found any number of reasons to forego a morning of its practice along these 40 days and 40 nights. Perhaps if you took on something or gave up something this season as a way to raise your consciousness to heavenly places, maybe you've become a little lax too, or perhaps you're far more stalwart than I, and this wouldn't surprise me in the least. But we're coming into the final lap. We're coming into the final 2 weeks, the final fortnight. And here on this day, maybe you're recommitting and planning to finish strong or broken. It's one or the other at this point. I can't tell you which way I will get across the Easter finish line. Or is it the beginning line? Or maybe it's both. Maybe the strength is in the brokenness. Maybe the beginning is in the end. It's hard to say while still putting one foot in front of the other here in the race itself. Today is the beginning of what we know will be the end of Jesus' human life. Jesus knows it too. In the Gospel of John that Lynn read for us this morning, we hear Jesus speaking eloquently and not without a bit of grandeur about the time of suffering and death that he is entering. Now, the Gospel of John is different, very, very different from the other Gospels when it comes to Jesus' death. What he knows about it, what he thinks about it, and what he thinks about himself as he approaches it. And here in the Gospel that we heard from Lynn today, he begins with the parable of wheat. Unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains just a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. He's the wheat. He's the death. He's going to bear much fruit. He loves his life, and he's going to lose it. He's about to be tortured and crucified, and he's going to keep it for eternity. This is the stuff of mystery. This is John. This is the mystery of Jesus, of death, of resurrection. It's the mysteries that make human minds race. But somehow the daffodils in the tree beds in front of the church this morning know without saying a word. Lucky little bulbs. How'd they get so wise? Many of you know the Harry Potter franchise. Maybe you've read the books or seen the films or have grandchildren who have or visited the Orlando experience. I can talk about that because the kids aren't in the sanctuary, so the parents aren't going to get mad at me for telling you about those. Maybe you've read along with your kids or with your grandkids. Maybe you've read them yourselves, feeling a little guilty about reading children's or young adult literature. Don't. There's a riddle that runs through the books, particularly the last books. It's this inscription on this tiny flying golden ball. It runs right across it, and it says, "I open at the close. I open at the close." This is a mystery to the characters in the story. Close of what? Opening to what? The end or the beginning? 2 weeks to Easter, there is a beginning of the end. We can mark it. Jesus has started talking about it. We are starting to talk about it. This is the beginning of the end. This has been a rather momentous week for the life of this building, this old sanctuary. You who have been tracking along know that last week the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints began worshiping in this sanctuary. And at 1:30 and at 3:30 they filled this space. They stood when our organ sounded. They pulled the green hymnals out of the pews and they sang. They filled those folding chairs that are sitting in the back, all across the back of the sanctuary. There were kids everywhere, and Cheerios everywhere, and vacuum cleaners later everywhere. And there was joy, and there was gratitude, and there was chaos, and there weren't enough rooms, and their bathrooms were confusing, and, well, it was a beginning. Or, as a very wise person on my staff, as Xavier said to me earlier this morning, "Will, I think it's the end of the beginning of the Mormons. Like, we're done beginning, now we're just here, right?" Which I thought, well, that was rather good, Xavier. I'm going to share that with the sermon this morning. The end of the beginning as the beginning of what will be. That was last Sunday. It was a day. It was a very, very full day. I'm going to tell you another story of what's happened this week in this building, so that you don't hear it from anybody else or your neighbors don't say, "Hey, what were all those fire trucks doing closing down 77th Street on Tuesday morning?" It's a story I've told consistory. It's one that Michael and Tito and Debbie and Xavier and Matt and I all lived. When I walked into the building on Tuesday, I walked upstairs and said to Michael, Michael, why does it smell like smoke? Michael's response was, it does, right? I said, yeah. Michael said, I think it's outside. I said, as somebody who just walked in from outside, I can assure you it's not. Michael, ever Michael, it kind of smells like a campfire. I said, yeah. And you know what campfires burn? Wood. Please go investigate. We are under massive construction. And the construction crew on Tuesday did indeed catch a small fire. Susan, you can see the hole above you in the ceiling right there. In some soldering, they caught the insulation on fire. And the insulation was smoldering and was filling this sanctuary with smoke. The crew did what they did. They emptied 2 fire extinguishers into it, and then it started getting worse. They called the fire department. The fire department responded. 77th Street was shut down. A crew was on the roof. A crew was in here. We watched. It didn't get worse. A miracle of miracles, it came soon to an end. Not without that lingering smell of smoke that you can still smell in here this morning. There was a miracle that happened. These scissor lifts that are here parked out of your way, they were here and the firefighters were able to use them to get to that ceiling. If they hadn't been here, the firefighters on the roof would have come through the terracotta ancient roof to get to the fire, and we'd be sitting with some new skylights this morning. I don't know whether it's the beginning or the end, but many of you who have lived through a fire in this building before no doubt have memories of this. All of us who lived through the fire that destroyed the Collegiate Sanctuary on 2nd Avenue just 3 years ago, it was very palpable in my body that day. That Tuesday morning as I stood in the back, helpless and watching our home fill with smoke. We had our weekly debrief meeting and planning meeting with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that Tuesday night, and they proved a point that had been in question. Do Mormons have a sense of humor? The answer is yes. They said to us, to Michael and to Matt, gosh, you invited the Mormons into your sanctuary last Sunday, then it catches fire on Tuesday. You think this is God saying something? We assured them it wasn't, that this was the beginning of something new and we were just making new room. But still it is here. I open at the close. Those who love their life will lose it. The beginning of the end. Of next week's Palms and Passion. Of a supper the following Thursday. Of a lonely hill that Friday. And of resurrection just on the other side, but first horrible and painful and very personal death. The beginning of the end in order to gain the whole world, in order to bear much fruit. The mysteries of the cosmos and of the Johannine gospel. The mysteries of a grain of wheat dying and falling to the soil where it is nurtured, not just back to life, but to life and to a fullness of life that one grain of wheat could never have imagined. You too may be falling to the earth. You too may feel that death is very, very close. And maybe it's a good death. Maybe it's something that you've longed to die. An old habit, a bad thing, a way of beating yourself up that you just need to stop. And you'll rejoice when resurrection happens. Or maybe it's not such a welcome occurrence. Maybe it's something much more painful. Something that you hold dear. Something that you're trying with all your might to resuscitate. And yet, die perhaps it must. At least the way that it was. To grow into something new, to bear much fruit. Broken or strong, how to finish this Lenten journey, we can discuss it on the other side of the hill. For today, it is still one foot in front of the other, to keep walking the path that Jesus walked, to not know quite what's on the other side, and to not approach everything as if we know the ending. God does. We keep walking. I will open at the close. I will begin at the end. I will end at the beginning. I, says the Lord, am the Alpha and the Omega. Such mysteries are so great for us to hold, or maybe just me to hold. But hear these words that God spoke to the prophet and through the prophet Jeremiah. I will make a new covenant with you. It won't be like the old one. It will be new. And I will write it on your hearts. Right across the seam of all the broken places of your hearts. Of your heart. Far more precious than gold. God writes, I will open at the close. In your beginning, in my beginning, in all our beginnings, we belong to God. In your ending, in my ending, in all of our endings, God sees nothing but beginnings. Resurrection is assured. Death comes first. Pain is unavoidable. And in that beginning, God sees life. And we can too. Hard as it is. And yet, what else is there to do? Today is the beginning of the end. So when you go out from here, what are you ending? Are you ready to let down, to put down, to give back to God and say, I can't do that anymore? End it. And begin something new. Begin to make new life. It's the final countdown. Easter, 2 weeks away, when all things will be made new. But you're going to need some room. You need to clear out the old cupboards. Clear out the old cabinets and take out the trash. Let go of all that is holding you back so that God can fill that space with wonder and life abundant for life eternal, which begins this day. Hold fast to these mysteries. Trust that the daffodils know more than you do, and trust that God knows even more.